Hello and welcome to episode 84 of the Synergen Leadership Podcast. For those of you listening for the first time, my name is Julian Carl and I'm the CEO and the co-founder of Synergen Group. Passionate about all things leadership and management, so passionate in fact that I decided to start a podcast about it. And here we are in season 2, and my purpose for the podcast continues to be the same, to raise the standard of leadership. In today's show, I speak with Sandra Hills, who is the CEO of Benetas, who are a leading not-for-profit organisation with a mission to provide older Victorians, their families and carers with a full range of quality community-based services, residential homes and apartments. Sandra joined Benetas in 2009 with a career experience in health, business management and public policy. And under her leadership, Benetas has diversified its services to meet new and future demand with a specific focus on innovation, research, workforce development and sustainable fiscal growth. Sandra has also held senior roles at the Brotherhood of St. Laurence and Whitehorse City Council. We start the interview off by looking back at when Sandra was first in a leadership role and the challenges associated with this. We speak a lot about the really challenging working environment Sandra has worked in. We also take some time to discuss succession planning and how she goes about building the capability of her executive team. And we finish the interview by talking about economic and societal challenges that are on the horizon. So keep listening, and as always, we'd really like to hear your thoughts about the interview with Sandra Hills, CEO of Benetas. Happy listening.
Welcome to the Synergen Leadership Podcast with Julian Carl. Julian returns in 2019 with weekly conversations with leaders and authors from Australia and around the world, giving you the opportunity to share in their journey and learn from their expertise and knowledge. Julian also shares some of the tools and techniques he uses as a leader, mentor and facilitator, helping you to build your leadership capability and improve your confidence as a leader.
Well, welcome, Sandra, to the Synergen Leadership Podcast. Really appreciate you taking the time to be a part of it so that the listeners have a bit of an idea about who you are and what you do. Can you give a bit of an insight?
Okay, it's great to be here. Benetas is an organisation that's 71 years young. We're a provider of aged care, but recently we've also put our toe in the water in the area of primary care as well as NDIS. We provide services to around 7,000 people, and we only operate in Victoria. We are part of the Anglicare Australia group, so we're actually independent, but we're actually part of that family. And we provide residential aged care. We provide home-based care, including nursing. We provide retirement living services, primary care, respite services, and we also have a research arm as well. I think I've recalled everything.
Okay, so a pretty diverse sort of operation there within the
We are,
aged care.
and in fact, 40% of our services are provided in rural and regional Victoria.
Okay. And number of staff?
It changes, but it's around about 1,600. But as you'd expect, many of those are part-time, and you're looking at about 85% of those people are female.
Aha, so interesting, opposite gender mixed.
With 42 different languages spoken. So it's a very culturally diverse organisation. Yeah.
How do you find leading a culturally diverse organisation like that?
We put a lot of time into our diversity policy and how we approach diversity. Many of those people work as personal care workers in our residential services and our home care services. We really do need to consistently think about how we engage those people, particularly when we're looking at attracting them into the workforce, training them. Inducting people, providing ongoing training. Our communication is really important. Thinking about how we tell them the information they need to know, and obviously understanding the cultures they come from too. It's just, for example, the end of life legislation that was recently released in Victoria. We need to think through how we might implement that within Benetas, because people from different cultures will have different viewpoints about what they should do or shouldn't do, not just from different cultures, but also from who they come from different religions or no religion. So It's quite complicated, but I think it adds to the richness. Definitely adds to the richness of our company.
So you're able to share with the listeners a bit of an interesting fact about Benetas that they may not know.
Well, I think I'd like people to know that Benetas, as I said, is 71 years old, and it was actually started at round about the same time as the Brotherhood of St. Laurence, who was my employee in my last job, in late 1940s, because at that time we come out of a recession, but there was quite a lot of unemployment and housing. There was a housing crisis in Victoria, particularly in the slums, in the inner city. And Benetas was started by the Anglican Diocese of Melbourne because those volunteers saw that there was a need for affordable housing for older people. And in that time, it wasn't just people who were frail or had a whole lot of medical or chronic conditions, because normally those people didn't live very long. These were people who would be in their early 70s, mid-70s, without really many medical conditions, but who just had insecure housing because there wasn't enough housing, and they hadn't been able to work, or they hadn't saved enough money, and there wasn't enough rental properties. So there was a housing crisis, and so Benetas was formed first and foremost to provide affordable housing. So some of these people, when I look back at the archives and I look at pictures of these people who were our very first residents, they were actually quite ambulant. They were quite active, but they just didn't have anywhere to live. And of course, government in those days didn't provide any housing. There wasn't a Ministry of Housing. There wasn't any social housing funding. So, of course, over time that changed and these people became frailer. So, that was our roots.
Right. So I'd like to take you back.
Oh, here we go.
All the way back to your start of your leadership journey. And are we able to share with the listeners the very first significant leadership role that you had?
So I started my life in nursing. So I went from general nursing to working with people who had an intellectual disability. That was a tough area. And I worked at it's not there anymore, but St Nicholas Hospital, which used to be in Pelham Street in Carlton. Okay. Trendy Carlton, wasn't so trendy then. These people, they were children, and they were the most disabled children in Victoria. They not only had intellectual disability, but they had physical disabilities, they had sensory disabilities, they had lots of disabilities. And it was decided that it was during the very start of the closing of the institutions. And I found myself, I still to this day start trying to think about how this happened, but I found myself, what they were doing was closing this institution and putting these people into the community, into group homes, and those group homes are still in existence today. They were later run by state government, and now they've been moved out to run by the private sector under NDIS. But these people were moved to the community, staff were to be moved, the institution was to be closed. And you can imagine during that time there would be a lot of interest from the union. For some reason, I was actually elected as the sub-branch official, and I was like, 20, I would have been like 23 or no, I wasn't even that old. I was in my early 20s anyhow. And it was tough. So I actually learned, and in those days there weren't very many women in the union movement. There was very few women in the union movement, and it was one of the health services unions that's changed its name now. But that was a really good learning curve for me, because what did I learn? I was working as an assistant charge nurse, but I realised that what did I learn from that was that very few people wanted to take the risk of actually doing that. You could say I was stupid and I didn't really understand what I was getting myself into. Yes, that would be right. But I was willing to have a go, and people were actually standing behind me, and they said, we think you've got the capacity to do this. So there's an enormous amount of trust in that. It really is. It's a huge trust. And the program the place was closed and there were a few issues, but there was no disasters. I later was involved in another closure and there were bigger issues with that one. So that was my first time. It was in a leadership role. So it was not so much being that I was an assistant charge nurse, but I was actually, because in those days there are very few people. You could end up being in charge of a whole lot of staff without actually finishing your qualification, because there weren't enough people who had qualifications. So you could find yourself very young, semi-trained, with a whole lot of much older people that you were leading. And many of them, they went down to the wharfs and picked them up from the wharf, so they actually didn't speak English. I'm quite old. But I know I'm saying this because people look at me and go, "What are you talking about?" It's true. They could not get, people, because the immigration went on for a long time, and these people were trained in other areas. So that was my first foray into leadership.
Wow, and not only a challenging leadership role, but that particular type of role dealing with the disabilities, both physical and intellectual, must have been very, very challenging.
Absolutely. It's very sad. When I think about and I've worked in just about every human services area, I still think working with people with disabilities is probably, and especially working with younger children, that area probably touched me the most. Yeah.
Do you think it was during that particular role that you sort of, and I know you were quite young, that you thought this leadership thing is for me, or was it at a later date?
No, that was a good example where I thought, well, these people were willing to give me a go, and I found that I had the capacity to instill confidence in people and to put up a proposal to be able to influence people and carry a lot of it through, not all of it, be able to smooth things behind the scenes and provide leadership. And, there was conflict, not a lot, but there was some conflict. And not everybody was happy with what was happening, or even me being the person out there. I didn't once feel that people thought I was too young to do it. I'm sure some people did. But anyhow, it certainly made me think maybe I can do this. And that's how I've found all my leadership journeys actually, is that you just try one more thing and you get yourself out of that comfort zone, and then you look back and you reflect on it and you say, actually, what did I learn there? So there's this whole journey of pushing yourself out there, identifying what it is that you are uncomfortable about, dealing with that, and then after working through how you're going to get through that, giving yourself a lot of self-talk on the way and a lot of planning and support and a whole lot of stuff. But when it's finished, doing your debrief all to yourself and to others, but let's say you're talking to yourself and say, actually, that went okay, I can do that, and I can do something more. So it is about not getting out of your comfort zone, not staying comfortable, because the minute you get comfortable, I think but that's also about some people getting their comfort zone, and some people get promoted far above what they should be.
Yeah.
So that is about why, that's about your insight into knowing, I think this is my limit. And that's where, of course, some people unravel themselves a bit because they don't know what their limits are.
Well, that's the, is it the Peter principle? People are promoted to their highest level of incompetence? Or?
Yeah, that's right. But, that is about getting feedback from a lot of people and not just relying on your own, I want to have that job. I didn't wake up one day and say I want to be a CEO, ever. I never. It all happened very gradually.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. So how long were you in that role?
Which role are we talking about?
The first one.
The place closed, and I think I might have moved out. I think I was in that role for about 3 years, and then that was it. The place closed, and I actually went to work for the government as a community nurse, and so it was quite a different role.
Okay. So you've had your first taste of leadership. What was sort of another significant role you think you moved into before the one you're currently in now?
I've had lots of different management roles. I've done all sorts of... My history of my career is that I've tended to choose roles that were not, I call it, country club type leadership roles where you just what I mean by that is you're just smoothing the waters, maintaining the status quo, keeping everybody happy. I tend to like roles where you are really making some changes, and so probably so a lot of my roles are about change. So I moved when everybody else was jumping out of local government. I jumped in at the time of when Jeff Kennett was Premier and services were being... So I told you I was old. Services were being tendered out. There was a compulsory competitive tendering. And I was working in the human services area, and of course because a lot of the budgets in local government were spent on human services, family, youth, children's services, aged care, those sorts of services. I led a large team, and a lot of our services were being contested. And that was a completely new culture change. So you not only were two councils brought together, and a lot of people were getting redundancies and leaving. They were also recruiting at that time. The budget was in. There were issues with the budgets. I mean, this is Victoria-wide, and you had to implement this new policy approach. And I think that was, the business rules hadn't been there before. I think there was some really clear benefits for the community about more responsive, more customer-focused councils, because councils always get a kick in the pants for, they should be more than rates, roads and rubbish, and they're not responsive enough, and where do my rates go? I've done that before. But it was very political, because of course you had commissioners in, not councillors. Very political, very different level of government, because I'd only worked at state government and then I worked in local government, and that was very, very different, because they are very, very much close to the people, but there's a lot of involvement with community groups, etc., etc. It is very political.
Do you think you found it easier to move into that role because you'd had a taste of leadership in the other role?
Absolutely. I'd worked for state government in between that, so that was I'd worked for state government for quite a few years. I think working for state government certainly helped me, and I actually think that working for state and local government has equipped me for then going in and working in the not-for-profit sector, or the third sector, as we call it. I think it's really good to be able to look at both sides of the story, to be able to look and say, well, this is why the bureaucrats might be saying this. I did have an interesting 5.5 years my first CEO role was actually when I was 25, which was young, but it was a disability agency that provided accommodation, group homes, respite services, and education and training to families who had a child with a disability, and that was it was like an $8 million enterprise. It wasn't very big.
Yep.
And that was very interesting at that age. I think that was also foundational for myself. So, yes, I definitely think I've had lots of opportunities, and I think sometimes people don't take them. I haven't taken all of them. I was actually talking to one of my staff this morning who's looking at his career options, and I said to him that quite often people want to go up the greasy pole. But the point is that you get up the greasy pole and you can get up there really early and look around and go, now what do I do? Where do I go? Sometimes it's easier it's actually better for your growth, to go have the breadth. And sometimes that means you're not going to get the pay increases. But it means that you expand your skill set, so you make sure that you've actually got a critical mass of skills in a range of areas, and then you can move up. You're far more grounded, but not everybody wants to do that, and I think that sometimes I would suggest that if your motivation is for status and for money, they are not going to probably serve you well if you wish to progress. Some people would disagree with me, but I think that peaking too early is not a good thing.
Yeah. Taking your time, getting a lay of the land, getting some, I think, experience is often underspoken about. I think we quite often think, oh, you just need to get there. But if I think about my leadership roles, if I had my time over again, and most leaders I speak to say, if I had my time over again, they would do things differently.
Yeah. Yes, I think I do a succession plan for my direct reports, and I give it to the board every year. And one of the things I write on the back of the report is I talk about, and this is just my words, my view, but you can teach people, they've got all the technical skills, they pick up a whole lot of leadership, management skills, but there's about 5 areas that I think there are things that MBAs and other courses, Harvard and Oxford, whatever, cannot teach. And these are things around the political savvy, some of the resilience skills, that's a big area at a range of levels, not just at senior management. Those sorts of skills, and there's a few others. You just can't teach those skills. And those skills, some of the judgment skills that people perhaps they can't see, they're blind, they can't see that they are perhaps only looking at their own area, they're not looking at an enterprise approach. That's one of the areas I find that general managers sometimes have real problems with. They can be quite biased about their own teams, but they don't take an enterprise view, and they may have made a decision that it actually affects the whole enterprise. It makes it look like they're favouring one particular part. It's really hard, but their judgment calls that not everyone are good at making, and they don't teach those. When I did my course at London School of Business, we didn't do a section on how to use good judgment 101.
So just talking on that for a minute, because succession planning is sort of red hot at the moment in a lot of the work we do, and we're finding the organisations that we talk to all say, yes, we believe in it, we want it, we agree with it. And when I ask them, what's the state of your succession planning? How far along are you? How advanced are you? And I'm finding that even some organisations are quite scarily deficient in their succession planning. So with yours, and you're talking about these key skills that you believe these GMs need to develop and nurture, do you deliberately try to put in some sort of approach from you to them in terms of trying to encourage them and foster them those particular skills? Is it a big focus for you personally?
It's not a big focus, but it's part of so we cascade it up and down the organisation. So I've talked about my direct reports, but it actually goes down to the next level and the next level in the business, because we're looking, so we have a workforce plan, and we're looking at, if this is our 5-year strategic plan, what are the skill sets we need? Do we have enough of them? And that's number one, which is a bit different to succession planning, I know that. But the second thing is we look at what are the key positions in your organisation, and who have we got that can fill those positions? And we identify people. There's a number of models that the HR professionals use, but we can identify whether or not someone's at level, that they're talent to be promoted, or there's somebody that we need to put some work into. And then that feeds into their learning and development plan. I do it a little bit differently for my direct reports, but it does actually talk about who is aspirational to be a CEO, who isn't, who is, and how they're tracking. It talks about whether or not they're interested in an acting opportunity, because, I've just been away on leave and I've had 2 GMs, one take 2 weeks and the other take 2 weeks, and that's fantastic because they've still got their normal run of everything during the day. And then I talk about those that I feel would be suitable, and then that forms part of their learning and development plan. Now, you asked me whether or not I'd actively promote that. I do via their learning and development plan, which is part of their performance review, and we can talk about it every time we meet. But at the end of the day, I'm a firm believer, and this is our approach for learning and development at Benetas, is that it's a partnership. Your learning and development's a partnership, so it's not my responsibility as your your manager to do these things for you. We have to join together, and you've got to do some of these things yourself, because we've got scholarships, funding. You can do all sorts of things we can help you with, and training. And if you don't want to get off your bottom, it ain't going to happen. And I think that's a good thing, because let's face it, nobody can make you go back to uni or to night class or to, But we acknowledge in our training and our learning that, 70% of learning comes from practice on the job. Yeah, the 70-20-10
model.
Yeah. So the 10% is only formal learning. And that's the adult learning model. So we practice that, but really is a partnership. If I see you as a talent to be a CEO in the future or somewhere else in the business, and we work out a plan and you won't do the plan, it's not my plan. My board don't say to me, we'll do the plan for you, Sandra. I've got to do it myself. And if you can't, and if you do it and we come back in 6 months' time and you've done nothing with it, it's like, who owns the problem? It's not my problem. Well, it might be my problem, because it actually would show something else about your interest in your own development. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So fast forward to now. CEO of Benetas, 1,600 staff. Are you able to give some more context around what your role is, how you see it?
It's changed. I've been here for 10 years. Some people might say, gosh, that's a long time. But when I came in 10 years ago, this organisation was in a lot of trouble.
Okay.
We'd had a very public falling out. It was we'd had 4 deaths due to suspected salmonella poisoning in one residential aged care facility. And everything that could go wrong did go wrong. It's a textbook case in terms of exec leaving, board leaving, board members leaving, public disgrace, like on the news, and difficulty in recruiting good staff, work cover going through the roof because of stress. So, work cover premiums were big. And of course that all impacted on the bottom line. So I'm just laying the scene, because there are some people that think if you can't get something done in 3 years, you might as well just move on. Organisations this size take a long time to turn around. So I was recruited to turn the business around from a financial perspective, from a cultural perspective, including the work cover, obviously premiums, but also to deal with the coronial inquest, which was quite complex, really. And we went ahead and rebuilt the organisation, and it's been a really good journey, but it's been a lot of work. I've had quite a consistent GM team during that time. I mean, there were some changes. People have worked hard, they've done a great job, but government then come in and make changes, reforms, and so it is tough. If I sat here and said that it was easy, it's tough, even before the Royal Commission, and we're really actively involved in that. But it's tough because there's not enough funding in the sector, and that impacts on the quality of who you can employ. The reputation, it's just a grudge purchase. Nobody wants to hear about aged care, and yet we're more than aged care. We do a whole range of other services. So I think in terms of my role has changed in that in the early days, I was very operational. I rolled up my sleeves. I had to get in there. There'd be no point in me appointing a chief operating officer and for me to just manage from a distance. You really had to get down and ask the questions. Why are we spending so much money on agency? Why is this taking so long, etc., etc. So I am now far more in the strategic. However, every now and again we do dip down. There are things that are just not right, and there's obviously some at the moment as usual, and so you do need to be able to helicopter and then zoom in on things that you might want to spend more time on. So people here know that if I have an interest in something, it's either because I really do have an interest in something, or I want to put the torch under somebody's bottom.
Okay.
So an area that where people are not paying attention,
Yeah.
then there's not attention to detail. They've let things, they're not following their project work plan. So I think that is my role. Obviously I'm managing the board and working closely with the board as the sort of link between the board and the executive team. It's really important that the executive team understand the functions of the board, because we have a really good, strong relationship with the board. The board are very respectful, and their GMs each have opportunities, and some come every month. So it's not me talking head, because how can I represent the vast array of what we do properly? But we've been really strict. We have followed through on 2 complete strategic plans, and we've achieved about 90 and 95% respectively of our strategic plan. We're into a new one now, just started a new one now for 5 years. And we think that's a pretty good result, because most people have strategic plans if they have them, but they don't follow through on them. We have a very strict regime with governance committees, and it's a really spread across the business. General manager being the chairperson, but we have a project management office and good approach to those sorts of things, but things go wrong. I think also my role is also, when I first came here, people were very internally focused. So I was very clear about saying, let's get the foundations almost right. Let's open up the blinds and let's look outside, because I've always had a very much an open, I've had an external view, and I do respect the fact that I do feel strongly that people have to contribute to the community and to their peak bodies and to other groups, not just, head down. This is just about us, sharing with other people, sharing with other businesses. I started a research and advocacy part of our business, which was new when I came. That's growing from strength to strength. We do get money from the federal government to do a whole lot of pieces of work, like the frailty screening, for example. And we like to share what we do with others. So that's part of why we do it, to inform government policy, but also to inform practice. And it's not much point doing it if you don't share it. And I know we're in a competitive environment in aged care, but seriously, I don't think there's any problem with sharing it. So I see my role also is to do a lot of the advocacy, obviously with the politicians, but I do involve and with the government, but I do involve my GMs in that, and that's a learning experience for them. Some like it more than others, and the ones that like it get to do it more often. I wouldn't force it on them. So I think also there is a very strong role for CEOs to pace set in terms of what are the priorities, but where you put, what areas do you fasten the pace on, what areas do you perhaps pull back a bit, and that obviously means where you put the resources, and obviously the culture to set the tone. So I think we have a very good culture here, and I think and obviously it comes from the board down through myself and my exec team. I think that's really important. I think as we know, culture eats strategy for breakfast. So I think I very much believe in that.
So you mentioned earlier that you see yourself as the sort of leader that is attracted to a business that needs to undertake significant change or is dealing with change. 10 years in to Benetas, is that change coming from within, or are you seeing or getting that change need fulfilled from all the changes in policy, government, economy, worldview? Where's that change coming from?
That's a good question. Well, it's interesting because both of the commissioners who are the commissioners for the Royal Commission, they have been quite scathing in saying to the industry, there's little leadership. We're really calling out for leadership, for ideas about, we're getting to the stage where we've heard all the good, the bad and the ugly. We want to hear from the leaders in the industry as to what you want the future to look like. And I think that, and also they've said, and stop blaming government, stop saying that you don't have enough funding. And I think, and I've got a response to that in terms of what we're going to do re the Royal Commission. I've got a really good idea about that. So, and it's a positive one. It's a positive one. I think that it's quite complicated because you've got the increasing longevity of older people, increasing frailty, more older people coming into the, more people aging. But with that comes, we've actually got family members becoming more involved and increasing expectations. I think that would have come regardless of government moving towards consumer-directed care. But I definitely think government policy direction, which we've had a say in. I mean, they've consulted. We haven't been passive recipients of. It hasn't just happened overnight. That has definitely had an impact. I mean, home care, there are lots of challenges in home care. I would be concerned. I mean, I know there's some money in the last budget to do a trial of consumer-directed care and residential care, but there's so many issues in home care at the moment. I think they need to fix up that first. I always like to be the architect of my own destiny and not have people. So I'd rather be at in most instances, I'd rather be at the front shaping, which is why I'm really delighted and honoured to be on the Aged Care Workforce Council, which people haven't heard a lot about because we are yet to announce ourselves, but we're actually the very small council made up of mainly providers and some union and consumers who are charged with the responsibility of implementing all the recommendations, the 14 recommendations from the John Peller's report, A Matter of Care, which is the aged care workforce report that was done 2 years ago. So that's my commitment to, because that's not just about workforce. It's got tentacles that goes into a whole range of other areas, but given that staff workforce is 70% of our budget and our staff are everything. So that's a big piece of work. So I would like to see, I actually think that it's multifaceted in terms of where the impacts have come from, where the changes, but I don't want to sit around waiting for the Royal Commission. I want to get moving, and I find that I found like folk amongst other providers who we can work with, but I think there is a lot of I've got to use the right term. People are weighed down in the industry by what's going on at the moment.
Yeah.
And I think I've had a number of people say to me, "How do you stay positive?" And there's the CEOs who are very skilled, and how do you keep going? I've got to be positive to my staff. I mean, that's another role of a CEO. I think it's not right to be positive. You've got to be honest, but have a way forward. Speak the truth, how you see it, but come up with a way forward and look at the good things that are happening, because it's really easy to forget all the good things that we've done. Yeah.
So I'm keen to explore some of your more general views on leadership, because we've got a bit more of a sense about you now as a leader. So what's the biggest leadership myth that you've come across during your time?
I think it's that one about that to be a good leader, you have to be outgoing, you have to be, an outgoing person, an extrovert. And my comment to that is, no, that's not true, because there are plenty of extroverts who are not very good leaders. I think someone who's more of has a tendency towards introversion is someone who can make a very good leader, because they can be very thoughtful, introspective, very a good listener, and does a lot of stuff behind the scenes. An external person can do that too. Do a lot of work behind the scenes. A lot of my work that I do is behind the scenes. A lot of someone who wanted to be a CEO one day said, "I couldn't do your job because I don't like I don't like doing all the small talk behind the scenes," not realising that that's actually quite often what gets the result. It's not about talking to people in a room and saying, "You'll do that and can you do that?" But sometimes the only thing is, the challenge for someone like that might be that you do find yourself quite often in situations where you have to get out of your comfort zone and either talk to a room of people you don't know or work the room. And I think that's where I've worked with introverted people to say, well, this is what you do. You're going to be uncomfortable, but that's like what I talked about before about being uncomfortable. It doesn't mean you can't. It's not a do or die thing for leadership, but I think that would be a myth that I think is something which I think needs to be tossed out in the rubbish.
Okay. And how do you describe yourself as a leader?
My style has changed a little bit over time, but I'm obviously an outgoing person. I actually used to be really extroverted, but I've actually toned down a bit. I have. You have to believe me. But I tend to be very situational, so I change my style depending on what the scenario is, who I'm talking to. I always consciously think to myself, okay, who are these people? What are they after? What do they want? What's the best way to approach them? But I'm a very optimistic person who but I like to believe that people do the right thing. But I also look for evidence. I've learned from bitter experience that you do need to be shown evidence that somebody has heard what you've said and they're going to do it or they've done it. I like to be very clear about this is where we're going, this is why we're doing it, this is where we're heading, and the person or people that you're talking to know how they can contribute. So where can they put their hat? I'm always very forward thinking. I'm very far. One of the things I've had to adapt a bit is I do tend to be. I used the word pace setter before, but I do tend to be a pace setter, and so you've got to understand that not everybody comes at your pace. So there is some modification of behaviour because you do want diversity. You do want diversity. You don't want everybody who looks the same and says the same. So building a team that's diverse is important. But having said that, I don't tolerate. I do really require people to be accountable and to perform. And if they don't perform, they know they haven't performed. Mm-hmm. So when I talk to the team, the leadership team, we have a leadership group meeting every 3 months or so. We always have a topic, a theme and whatever, but I always try and think about what's going on in the environment at the moment and what would I like to leave them as a message. What's the, I do think I'm an authentic leader, so I'm actually quite comfortable with sharing with people what, where I think I've done really well and where I think I haven't, and sharing that, one of those characteristics of authentic leadership is actually sharing why you've made decisions, where you think you've gone wrong, how you think you can do better. So I suppose in summing up, I manage through relationships, not through authority, power, those sorts of things. I don't have, but I'm quite, I won't say comfortable, but I and this is an area I think with experience I've got much, much, much better at it. If you're not performing, I have a particular approach which I would change. I don't expect all my direct reports I manage in a very different way because it's about their personalities, and because I said I manage through by relationships. But you would be very clear. You would know if you were doing really well. You'd know where you needed to make some changes, and you would also know if you weren't doing well and you're on the way out. Yeah.
I'm always curious about leaders and the types of models or frameworks or tools that they're particularly partial to. Are there any that have resonated with you over your time that you sort of your go-to?
Well, when I did my MBA years ago, I had a whole book of them,
yeah.
and I would actually use them, and I have used them, and there's a few I've used over time. If I understand what the concept is and why you use them. So, but I guess for me, I still think that that focusing on the number of times I've said to people, who look like they've heard it for the first time, which always amuses me, is, strategy, structure, staff. Because if you think it's logical, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah. I think that's, but I've got a whole book of them. But no, I think I'm always looking for new models. We use the balanced scorecard for our structure reporting to the board, but I modified it because I do that sort of thing where I never liked that model.
Yeah.
Because I like it enough to use it, but there wasn't any in the 4 areas. There wasn't an area that actually was the overall strategic directions of the business, so I added it. So I've got 5.
Yeah.
So probably that would be the other one that stood the test of time. Actually, we've had it. I introduced it when I first came here, and it's still here, and people like it, and the board like it. So
great. So right now, because we're recording this podcast in early July, what's your biggest leadership challenge that you can see in the immediate future?
I've got some challenges around some of my middle management and looking at in a particular program and making them understand their accountability. That is probably my biggest. And, it's disappointing when you've got everything lined up. You've got all sorts of tools. You've trained people up and people know there's expectations about they should know what they have to do and they just need to check things every day. It's all been set up and then they don't do it. And then you dig and you find out that why they're not doing it is because the systems have failed, because people have left or they're on sick leave, and the systems were not set up well enough so that those people, new people coming on, whether they be temporary or permanent, don't get trained in those areas and haven't. You can't blame them; they haven't got a clue that that's what they're meant to do. And you thought that the orientation induction program was neatly. There's a book and it was all embedded. It hadn't been implemented. Nobody's looked at it. So it's that sort of stuff's really frustrating. You just want to explode, and nobody's taking responsibility, and nobody's shown any accountability or initiative that they should have done that, and that's really frustrating. I think. So there's some of my challenges at the moment, but they're all achievable because we've got, if you get the right culture and the right, these are things that are just technical things.
Yeah.
But it's frustrating.
So I'd like to explore this thing that I've been calling your area of leadership passion. So what is it about? What's that part of leadership that really floats your boat? The one that just gets you up every morning and it gets you so excited?
Well, one of the things is I love to be able to see people when they've really when the light goes on and they've just got it, and sometimes, particularly if it's someone who you wouldn't have thought would have, which probably could say something more about you and your judgment actually, but who absolutely gets it. And you get presented with we're going to do this, and you can either say, well, that's a lot of crap and I'm not going to do that for these reasons, I think it's wrong, or you can go, yeah, I'm going to give it a go. I'm going to give it a go, and I think it's good for the enterprise. And I think people that are on that trajectory who are willing to give it a go and will say, I'm gonna do that. So people who put their hand up for assignments that you would never have thought that they would have, obviously with support and all that sort of stuff, I think. And then you see them grow and develop, and like the journey that I talked about, they've been brave enough to do that, and then they might have some bad experiences, but they have more good ones, and they keep on going. And I think that's really inspirational. People that who say, well, I've never had a setback. I've never not got a job I've gone for. Well, hey princess, that might stop soon, because that's unrealistic. You can't, or I don't like doing things that make me feel uncomfortable, or I don't like getting knockbacks, or I don't like doing X, Y, Z. So it's people that actually toss that, challenge that. The people that won't take those challenges and are just not going to, they're going to stay there. And I hear those sort of things like, oh, well, you're going to be in that box for quite some time, I think.
Yeah. What does the future hold for you? So you mentioned you're just starting your third strategic plan. So what else does the future hold for you?
Well, I'm involved in quite a few external things.
Okay.
And most of them are to do with the health, ageing, disability area. I'm on the board of Community Chefs, which is a fantastic organisation. Yeah, who they were set up by a lot of local governments to, provide meals to people who are mainly older people, but not all people with a disability. Who so they focus on food security, and that's a community-based enterprise, which is fantastic. I'm not really sure. I mean, my view is that I have lots of energy. I've got lots and lots of energy, and I think that our third strategic plan focuses on, it's very similar to the previous one, with the key difference that we put the customer at the centre of what we do. So that has actually impacted the whole of the plan. So I've got a much tighter focus on the customer. But in terms of myself, there's still a lot to be done here. There's a whole lot of community, there's a whole lot of builds that we're doing where we're doing, we call them continuing care communities. So where we've got retirement living, residential services, and we've got community care as well, and hopefully allied health. So we acquired a service last year that has residential, but it's also got allied health and NDIS. So we're actually looking at, there's some real opportunities for us there as to what we do there. But I'm really interested in keeping up, if possible, my external involvement on a number of boards, like Anglican Care Australia and Community Chefs, and on the Workforce Council. I think there's quite a lot of work to be done. Those things those challenges that some of those boards are looking at are not going to be solved overnight. Yeah. So I think, but that's a bit about me looking internally and saying, well, am I still adding value, or do I need to move on? Do I need to do something else? Yeah. I'd be hoping that if I'd missed that insight, that somebody would sort of tap me on the shoulder and say, "Can we have a coffee? We need to chat." Yeah. I think there's still quite a bit of there's a lot of challenges, and I feel like I'm up for it.
Okay. I think the way leaders approach their own development changes as they, number one, get more experience under their belt, but number two, climb a hierarchy of whatever organisation they're in. So you're CEO, the highest of the high in terms of a normal organisational structure. How do you continue your development as a leader, as a person?
That's a good conversation to be having with me, because next Friday I have my performance review with some of my board, and I have a learning and development plan that I have devised. So, I went through the stage where I've done a couple of courses overseas, etc. And, you've got to be really careful about what you choose, because some of them are not. I know my learning style, and there's one particular style that doesn't suit me, But I think you've got to look broader than that, because I think by the time you get to my level, there's a lot of things that you need to refresh, but it is about learning differently and thinking differently and exposing yourself to different areas. I think, and that's why I've always liked to study with other people from other professions, like not doing aged care, health, human service type qualification. Well, I have them, but not more senior. Because you do pick up, and it's good to work in different industries, so or to listen to people from different industries. So, but I think that's one of the reasons why it's good to be on, for me, some of those other boards, because it does expose me to other things, like Anglican Care Australia, because that's a really broad. Yeah. We're quite narrow, but a lot of our members they provide everything from, financial counselling to housing, Indigenous services, domestic violence, family with children services, aged care, disability, so listen to some of the issues that they have. Are quite different, being on the Community Chefs Board. So I'm not one, I do go to conferences, particularly if I'm presenting, but I think, you need to make sure you come away with a couple of take-homes from a conference. I think sometimes that's more about networking. So I'm not one, I read a lot. Writing is a good thing. I think we were talking before about that. I mean, I think forcing yourself to look at a topic that interests you and write. A lot of what I get published, I actually write myself. I do give it to one of my communication people to tidy up, but actually it's my ideas, it's my writing, and I do it myself. I think that's a good discipline. I think that's one of the problems with being a CEO, especially of a large company. You actually can get de-skilled. You don't write anything. I still know I can do that, because occasionally when I don't get what I want in the right time, I'll just go, oh, for goodness sake, which might not be good management, but it's good. I just do it.
Yeah. And the biggest challenge facing Benetas as a whole in the coming years?
Oh, the financial domain we find ourselves in is not good. I mean, we've got a big balance sheet, but the industry, we know from the Stuart Brown benchmarking that 45% of companies are not making a profit. That is bad. It's getting worse. We're not in that group, but that's a lot. And they're mainly smaller ones, smaller organisations. And a lot of them are rural and regional. Government are aware of it. We would just adjust our strategic plan implementation. And there's still a lot of levers we can pull. But recruiting and retaining the best staff is really, really also a challenge. So, and whether or not government will do anything, we don't know. But certainly, if you've been following the Royal Commission, you would know that lack of funding is a huge issue.
Yeah. Are there any leaders that inspire you or you look up to?
I tend not to want to put names here, but I can talk about the characteristics that I really like. I like people who have gone against all odds to, achieve something, including people that have come from, that have been refugees, asylum seekers, whatever, and have achieved amazing things. And then, you think, why can that person do that when this person's had all the benefits of an affluent education and they, and there's lots and lots of complicated ways of answering that. But people that have overcome adversity to get where they are, people that have been, there's so many people that are unsung heroes that are just the quiet people. And we have them, we have plenty of them, our staff. They just get in there, do their stuff, and they would die. They don't want you to know what they do. They just want to, and if you single them out, they're embarrassed and this is my job. But I do think most people like to be recognised. So, but leaders on the world stage, I actually follow. I find it fascinating. I love following leaders and what they say and how they make their decisions. Yeah. And I always think, what would I do? What would I do if I was Theresa May in Brexit? What would I do if I was Donald Trump? Please do me a favour. But seriously, I really do think about that, and I think about what would I do if I was this one and that one. And it's, of course, get yourself in that situation is different. But I think there does seem to be people who are good communicators, who can bring together a lot of disparate people who've got different views. I think Julia Gillard did a really good job of bringing together what was seen as a hodgepodge of crossbenchers. I'm not sure if the current government's going to have. Well, I don't think they've got such challenges in crossbenchers, but last Parliament they did. I think that's a real skill, because I think that's about giving up. That's about giving up some of what you might want, leaving some of your ego at the door.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of that around.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
You look pretty certain about that.
Oh, yes. Well, yeah. I don't normally talk about politics on the podcast, but it's, I think we're in for some interesting times ahead. So if people are interested in finding out more about you and Benetas, where should they go?
Well, if it's about Benetas, it's our website, which is obviously benetas.com.au. Is it .org? No, I can't remember. Anyhow, if you put Benetas, Benetas, into the search engine, it'll come up. We have a fantastic new website, and hopefully we'll have a customer portal there soon. It'll make it easy for our customers. If people want to find out about me, well, whatever I decide to disclose on LinkedIn, I suspect, yes.
Okay. Any last words on leadership?
I would just like your listeners to think about, just to remind people that leadership can come from anyone. So it's not just about, I think once again, people generally think, well, it's the person who's the head of the organisation. No, there are many, many people that provide leadership in all sorts of areas. And I think I've just been away overseas, and I made some notes. There were some amazing stories of people who, when things went wrong, just showed amazing leadership, and they were in very junior positions in their company. And I thought, I love people like that in my company, because they showed initiative and they just saw what needed to be done, and they did it, and other people followed them. So I think, it's not about the CEO or the leader of the organisation. It's a role for everybody, and I think that's something we forget.
On that note, Sandra, thank you so much for being part of the Synergy Leadership Podcast.
My pleasure.
Well, that wraps up episode 84 of the Synergy Leadership Podcast. Another great business leader episode for you. I'd like to encourage you to head on over to the Synergy Group website and engage in the conversation with us. Tell us what you liked about the episode, tell us who you'd like us to interview, or tell us what sort of content you'd like us to deliver to. If you are an iPhone user, please feel free, head on over to the Apple site and leave us a review. It really does help us build awareness of the podcast. In next week's episode, we have another great author episode for you, where I speak with Tony Homewood, author of Best Behaviour, Empowering Managers and HR Leaders to Coach and Align Employee Behaviours to Supercharge Growth. It's another author interview. Until then, love to hear what you think. Happy listening.